So archetypes, Jungian and other ones. So you might have come across the word archetypes before, and in some places they are right now very fashionable. And what I've noticed is that 5 years ago, when I tried to Google up archetypes, it was not easy to find any references to them. And now something has happened in the meantime. And when I now Google them up, I always find the same set of archetypes. So somebody probably in who's working probably for marketing or for some other field has found archetypes, and now they are spreading the word. And what disturbs me is that these archetypes are vaguely like the ones that Carl Jung invented in the early 20th century. Also, they are vaguely a little bit like what Joseph Campbell came up with in his The Hero with 1,000 Faces book and the subsequent television series. You can find the series, by the way, in YouTube. But they are much simplified from the original. And also Jung and Campbell never said that the archetypes they presented were the only ones. That there are lots and lots of variations. Okay, I see in the chat that Henna wants to order pizza now. Okay,
Carita, the screen is not shared.
No, it's not yet shared. I know.
Okay.
I'm getting there now. This was just a preamble, so to say. Okay, here we go. So let's go to the actual Jungian archetypes. And I have a couple from Joseph Campbell as well. And because archetypes are always a question of interpretation, these are my interpretations of the Jungian and Campbell's archetypes. And that's what you should do also when you're using archetypes for story purposes. You should do your own interpretations. And I dread to say this, but do your own research. So sometimes it's not a bad thing if you do it right. But it's becoming a joke now in social media. Just do your own research. I know that. Anyway, so who was Carl Gustav Jung? He was a psychologist born in Switzerland, and later on he moved to the United States. You can also find a short piece of film about him where he's interviewed in the 1960s, I think, in the very early 60s or late 50s. He was a good friend of Sigmund Freud until they were not friends anymore, but that's a whole other story. So his life was actually quite interesting in itself, but we are now interested in his archetype theory and how we can use it in stories. So for Jung, archetypes were these repeating patterns, actually, or repeating thought patterns that appear again and again in different cultures, in different countries, in different eras. So he had made some research in mythology and fairy tales, religions, and tarot cards, which you might or might not know. And he was a great fan of writing down his dreams and also, of course, listening to the dreams of his patients. And and that was part of the inspiration that he took. So this was all part of, the archetypes were part of his theory of the collective unconscious, which may or may not exist. He was a firm believer that there is some sort of collective, actual collective unconscious where everybody dives in when they dream, or where people are connected to. So he had his mystical ideas as well, but we can treat this as a purely psychological phenomenon. So there are 4 basic types of Jungian archetypes, which also are connected to the makeup of a person's soul, like, and self or personality, like how. So these are parts of every person, but they can also be used for stories and are used for stories. So there's the Animus and the Anima, then there's the shadow, and there's the self. And you can find images of this system when you Google it up, but for some reason I didn't put the image here. Don't know why. Maybe I should. Anyway, let's go first to the shadow. Who or what is the shadow? So it represents deep things that we don't want to recognize. Shadow is often the antagonist, but sometimes if you have an anti-hero, then the shadow might be your protagonist. So any of these archetypes can really be a protagonist, and that's the good thing here, that you can use them freely as you like to. You can go as deep with them as you want. So a shadow disobeys rules and plunges things into chaos and battle. So Sauron from the Lord of the Rings comes to mind right away. But also the shadow can be fascinating somehow, or exotic, so that there's a lure that the protagonist maybe wants to be the lover of the shadow, or become somehow involved with the shadow. So the shadow, but the shadow can't exist on their own, so it has to be connected to the light in some way. So can you think of any like shadow characters in movies, for instance, or TV series or other stories?
I said it in the chat, but there's a video game called Persona 4 where the entire story is about confronting your own shadow. And they call them by that name as well, so it's a direct reference.
Of course. I'm thinking of Harry Potter, where the shadow character is also quite clear. It's Voldemort, and they even don't want to say his name. Okay, so here are some examples how the shadow can appear. It could be a wild man or woman, or wild in a metaphorical sense, maybe. It's seducer or seductress, or quite simply somebody who is like a total sociopath. Hybrid people, like people who are part animals, all these dark enemies that you find in adventure and action stories and movies, and mysterious fighters. So the shadow can take many shapes. And the shadow, if it's a human character, or even any kind of character, they can have their own reasons for doing what they do, and they should have their own reasons. So you should be able to understand the shadow, why they are acting like they do. Although it could be argued that if you have a horror story, then you don't need to know why the monster is that way, but sometimes it adds to the story that you find out, or your protagonist finds out by and by, what made the evil character evil.
Yeah, I think actually it's useful that the writer at least knows why, but maybe not the audience, but at least the writer should know, right?
Yes. Okay, so let's go further to the Animus and Anima. And persona meant the mask that we wear, but Animus and Anima means our soul. In the Jungian soul structure, like every person has both parts. So the anima is the female part of a person who's male, and the animus is the male part of somebody who's female, or they could be both at the same time. So anyway, it represents our true and ideal self, like not the persona, but who we are deep down. And also the Animus and Anima has a way to communicate with the collective unconscious, according to Jung anyway. And it's a source for creativity as well. So Animus and Anima characters are often heroes, superheroes, other powerful beings, even gods. So they are our ideal selves, in some ways. The image is by William Blake, by the way. Then when the Animus and Anima go together, then they make the syzygy, and I have no idea if I'm pronouncing it right. Maybe it's syzygy. Anyway, it's the divine couple. So it's a harmonious union between two or even three. So there's holy pairs and holy triads in most of the religions of the world. And it represents the wholeness of one. So in a person, of course, if your male and female parts are in harmony, then then it's a good thing, which brings a person power. And if they are not in harmony, then there's the problem. The person might have some problems with themselves. But yes, in a story you can have this totally harmonious couple, or you can have a triad of characters who work dynamically together. In a course called
The Legend of Zelda, basically. They have the triad of the main characters, basically.
Yep. So in a course called Character Design and Storytelling, which is held every fall for the second and third year students, I'll talk more about these triads of characters and go deeper into that. But now I'm just mentioning that. So you can think about video games and movies and other books where you have spotted these holy triads and holy pairs. Okay, then we have the self. So the self is the coherent whole, and it's the individual that we are now talking about, and usually it's also a good starting point for your protagonist. Although there are some stories where the hero and the self or the protagonist are different people. Like if you know Scott Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby, which is a book and which has been made into a movie many times, The Great Gatsby. In Finnish it's called Kultahattu, or Golden Hat. Anyway, the protagonist, the self of the story, is not the hero. So yes. Then let's go to other archetypes that Jung mentioned, and also Joseph Campbell in some sense had these. So I mentioned the family earlier already, that all of us have some sort of family, as we are human beings. That's how we grow up, having families or being part of a family. So that's how we could think about this collective unconscious, if we don't think of it as a mystical entity. It's a psychological thing. I couldn't hear that. Was somebody commenting? Okay. And you can, here there are tarot cards from the Empress and the Emperor. So of course the father could be said to be an emperor or a king, and the mother could be a queen. Also we can have the great goddess archetype here, or the great god, quite as easily. And the grown children, the daughters and the sons and the others, they are the princes and the princesses that you often encounter in fairy tales, and in different ways. You have them also in movies and games. They don't need to be actually called princes or princesses, but that's what their function might be. And then there's the eternal child. Think Peter Pan, for instance. The child that never grows up. That's one psychological archetype, by the way, in real people also. Then we have the grandparent, who can be the wise old woman or wise old man, or the silly old woman, and the idiotic old man. So we all know some of these from our lives, and also from politics and movies and so on. And that's the freedom and of archetypes, actually, that you can choose them to be whatever you like. The father character or the king character can be nurturing, or they can be really cold, or they can be really dumb, but they are still the father character. And that's how you can play with them as a story creator. You can have a really, you can have a son or the prince character who's actually a seductor of your main character, or the daughter or the princess can be the seducer.
I just remembered. Sorry,
yeah.
I just remembered that, for example, in Tangled, the witch is basically the tyrannical father in that story, playing the caring mother. So,
or well, or the tyrannical mother as well.
No, but the trope, because it's the father trope is the tyrannical one, and the mother is the overly caring one.
Yeah, that's why I'm not talking about the tropes, because and I'm rather talking about archetypes, because also I didn't mention about stereotypes, because a stereotype is always one thing, which is also how some of these tropes work. So, like you said, the father is stereotypically often seen as tyrannical, or the tyrannical patriarch, and so on. But they can be anything else as well. So you have the mother character in Tangled, who is actually like a manipulating tyrant, but she's not even the real mother of the princess. So reading about tropes sometimes helps, and it's fun to go to TV tropes. I know it's easy to spend a lot of time there, but be careful not to be lured by the stereotypes, because stereotype can be only one thing at one time and nothing else. So if you use archetypes, then you can make these any way you want. So and any of these archetypes can be your protagonist. So it's not said that your main character should always be the hero, for instance, or it can be the eternal child, for instance. That is your protagonist. And that's why I'm so keen on archetypes. Then these go into the what has been taken from Joseph Campbell's book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. There's the magician archetype, or the sorcerer. Then we have the trickster or shapeshifter archetype. Can you say, by the way, which Marvel series has the trickster as a protagonist?
Is it Loki?
It's Loki, of course. So Loki has been the trickster character, never the main character before in most of the Marvel movies, and now in the Loki series, he's the protagonist. And we learn to understand him a little bit better, maybe. Then we have the scapegoat, who pays the sins of others. And you might think of a couple of religious stories where the scapegoat character is important, or religious myths. Then there's the... Oh, by the way, I'm sorry if I'm offending some people with religious beliefs. I'm not. That's not my purpose. Anyway, there have been incidents before when I have talked about other religions and then Christianity, and people have reacted very adversely. So, okay, I'm not trying to offend anybody with religious beliefs here. Okay, then we have a servant character who might be loyal, might be wily. It could be also an animal, like a dog, or it might be a magical being that is helping somehow or not helping. I already mentioned the mirror in the previous slides, that the mirror can mirror one of the main characters, and it might be a dark mirror or skewed mirror. So if you have an anti-hero as the main character, for instance, then the mirror character could be the actual hero who does things right when your main character does the wrong choices. And then there's the mentor, who teaches the character what they need to know, and maybe they will listen to that teaching and maybe they don't. And each of these can be anything at all again. So the mentor might be reliable or maybe not. Okay, and that's basically what I wanted to say about archetypes. Any questions or comments?
I assume